but I'm so glad that you can join us tonight. We've been doing book club for a few years, and every month we read a book together. We talk with the author or authors, and I'm going to introduce Bishop Mark Beckwith in just a minute. But first, let me tell you that we got some cool stuff going on this month at Red Letter Christians. We've got morning prayer every first of the month. So the first day of each month, usually at 9 a.m., we do morning prayer together. This month, we are going to be joined by Pastor Todd Yeary, who is the chair of the board of Red Letter Christians. He's also the senior pastor of Douglas Memorial Community Church down in Baltimore. Incredible brother. Also, over the last couple of years, became a lawyer. So he is a dangerous cocktail of a pastor and a lawyer. The resistance is getting organized. Watch out, Proud Boys and the NRA. We got some pastors that are lawyers now. And it's great. What else we got? We got our book of the month this month for September. Little drum roll. Oh, boom. American Idolatry from Andrew Whitehead. Andrew's just an incredible brother, done a bunch of stuff with us around Christian nationalism. It's going to be a great book. Pretty easy, like not too thick. So grab a copy of American Idolatry, read it with me this month. Andrew's going to join us at the end of September. So this weekend has also been a pretty fun weekend. If you've looked at our social medias, we've had the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, and Caroline, his wife, here at our house. They were staying right here for the last couple of days. We spent it together, and he's the head of the spiritual leader of the Anglican Church, 85 million Christians around the world, and has been a courageous voice on so many fronts, welcoming immigrants, around sexuality, around just all kinds of stuff. He's such a voice of compassion and justice. So you can see a little bit more about his visit and everything on our social media. And so it's been a weekend of bishops and archbishops. And tonight is one more bishop friend, Mark Beckwith. This is his book, which some of you all have been reading with us. It's okay if you didn't do your homework, if you're just joining in and haven't read it yet, but check it out. Consider grabbing a copy of it. Seeing the Unseen, Beyond Prejudices, Paradigms, and Party Lines. I had the honor of doing the foreword to it. There's all kinds of great endorsements. And Mark is a retired bishop in the Episcopal Church for 12 years and has done a lot of writing and a lot of organizing. So he's not just kind of a theology alone, but also an organizer, and helped organize the Bishops United Against Gun Violence. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but welcome, buddy. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shane. Thank you again. It's good to be sharing this work with you. Again, Shane wrote the foreword to the book, for which I'm eternally grateful. And he and I worked together in a new initiative called Faith Leaders for Ending Gun Violence. And we're getting ourselves off the ground, and our hope is to create a network of Christian leaders, particularly Christian leaders, to offer organizational and informational and programmatic opportunities for people in congregations to take on and to offer some witness and help and action against the scourge of gun violence, which is, as we know, is just ratcheted up beyond anything any of us could possibly imagine. And so the Christian church, particularly, I say the Christian church because a lot of the resistance to reducing gun violence, in fact, comes from the Christian church. So we need to deal with our brothers and sisters in the Christian faith and engage in conversations, in actions, and see if we can move the needle, which is already being moved. So that's a really good thing.
Yeah, and you remind me, that this book is not just about gun violence, but it is some of the organizing you and I have done together, and we are, gathering once again with heavy hearts tonight as we remember multiple mass shootings that were in the news yesterday. We got to check out the news last night, and among the terrible, there was a shooting at the White Sox game, there was a shooting at a high school football game, and there was all the terrible shooting in Jacksonville that we now know was fueled by racism and an act of real terrorism against African Americans, targeting them in Florida. So, and it's also a reminder that white men with guns continue to be the biggest threat to public safety in America. 85% of homicides are done by men. White men with guns are 71% of extremist related deaths, 71%. So we think of mass shootings, we think of these acts of real domestic terror so often carried out. And once again last night. So you're doing a lot of work in this book. So as we jump into your book, Mark, one of the things that you really begin with is this idea that we've got to not just speak in silos, but we've got to begin to win people's hearts and minds over to the cause of justice and love and compassion. And you've got a lot of creative language that you use with that. But I wanted to give you the opportunity first just to say, what was behind this book and what kind of created the fire in your bones to write it right now.
Thank you. I think I can start with a story. I was new to the Diocese of Newark in downtown Newark. That was where our office was. And when I pulled into the office parking lot the first week, I noticed that there was a soup line immediately next door at a Catholic church. We shared a driveway. And I noticed it because I had started soup kitchens, worked in shelters. This had been a big part of my ministry. But after 2 or 3 weeks, I didn't notice it anymore. I didn't see it. Why? Because I'm up on the 4th floor of our building, looking out across the diocese, 100 congregations, each with its own mission, its own concerns, its own problems, and all the rest of it. And so I didn't see what was going on next door. I literally didn't see them. Maybe 3 years in, a priest in the diocese came up to me and she said, "What goes on next door?" And I said, "Oh, there's a soup line." And she said, "Well, let's go." And so a group of us went next door, not to serve, but to have conversations with these men, and it's mostly men, almost exclusively men. And I'm embarrassed to say this, I learned that there were 250 men at breakfast and 250 men at lunch who I didn't see. They were just sort of foreground of the Passaic River behind me. I didn't notice them. And when we finished our conversations with many of these guys, we debriefed and, what did we learn? What did we see? And the same priest put her finger in my chest and she said, "Don't you dare go just once." And so I didn't. I went weekly and spent time with these guys, and they knew I was the bishop. I had all the accoutrements. I had the ring. I had the purple shirt. I had my own office, all this kind of stuff. So there was a kind of a difference in the socioeconomic status of each of us. But we started telling our stories to each other. And some of these guys, not all, many of them were kicked to the curb, some through their own doing, and a lot of it because that's what the culture does to men of color, and they were almost all men of color. But many of these guys lived with a level of courage and faith that had never been tested to that degree in me. And I didn't see them. And so that was sort of the impetus for writing this book. What don't we see? And we're trained to see what we think we need to see. And often we don't see what's right there in front of us. And again, I was really transformed by many of these conversations. One guy said to me, "Oh, you got to read Psalm 91." And I'm thinking, what's Psalm 91? So I go back to my office, read Psalm 91. It's about eagle's wings and being under the shade of eagle's wings. He says, Psalm 91 helps keep me alive. And you never know who your teachers are going to be. And that sort of also launched into another part of the book around mission, the whole notion of mission in the Episcopal Church, where I've been for 44 years as an ordained person. We talk a lot about mission, but in large part in the West anyway, and maybe in just the Episcopal Church, but I think in the Christian church in general, mission has been bringing God to places where God is not. And if you think about that for a moment, think of the arrogance of that. There's not a square inch of ground on the face of the earth where God is not working. So mission is joining God where God is already working. And another notion of mission is, well, doing for. And sometimes we need to do for. People don't have a place to live. We need to find them a place to live. They don't have food. We need to find them food. But what often happens, it just maintains the gap between those who have and those who don't. And the real challenge is to be with and to be brothers and sisters with one another, to realize that we all have something to learn from one another. And that's not easy to do. Because our whole system, certainly our educational system, and I think our theological systems try and reinforce the distance and the gap between those who have more advantages and those who have less. And we see disadvantaged people. Wait a minute, where I think that just immediately puts it in a category that causes problems.
We use the language of brokerage. The church is good at brokering resources and services, but God wants to create transformative relationships and build community across class. And so we've got to be more creative than just creating programs where people get stuff and give stuff, but never have these kind of transformative friendships and relationships. And the other thing I heard in what you were saying, Mark, is and you talk about this in the book a little bit, is some of our best theology comes from the bottom up. And I know, you're a bishop. I've been to seminary. I've been to all these places, but some of the best theology I've ever heard is coming just out of the struggle to survive. And I was telling Archbishop Justin last night, one of our neighbors saw me out in the garden, and she said, I get what we're doing. And I said, what? And she said, we're trying to bring the Garden of Eden to North Philadelphia. Bring the Garden of Eden to North Philadelphia. I'm like, man, N.T. Wright doesn't even say it that good. But this idea that, there's something to when a mother lost her kid in her neighborhood. You've heard me talk about this, like a 19-year-old kid was killed. And the mother, as we were praying, she said, God knows what it feels like to be me, to lose your child. And that theology, that's some of the best theology I've ever heard. God knows what it feels like to lose your child. And this theology from the bottom down, or as Bob Ekblad, in his book, he's got a book called Reading the Bible with the Damned. And he talks about how what's important is not just that we're reading the Bible, but who we're reading the Bible with, right? Are we listening to those who have experienced life a little differently than those in the ivory tower or those in the seminaries and academia? So, man.
Another component of this that I write about in the book, and it's a challenge that I have faced, and it's a challenge I make to Jesus, because when he stood up and held up the scroll of Isaiah in the home synagogue, he said, "I bring I bring sight to the blind, the lame will walk, the deaf will hear, and the poor will have good news preached to them." And he puts the poor in one category. And what I've learned, and I've said that, most of us have said that, we continue to refer to the poor. When we do that, we leave people without names or stories. And in some ways, I think that's the way we want to keep it. So we don't want to know their stories. We don't want to know their names. And so we keep them anonymous, and that enables us to keep distance from people who are economically poor. I've lived in some very wealthy communities, economically wealthy communities, and a couple of them have been the poorest places I've ever been. Just hardly any spirit. And a story that I say in the book, and it sticks with me. I heard it my sophomore year in college, I think. It was right after Bill Russell retired. He was played for the Boston Celtics. He won 10 NBA championships in 11 years. One of the best players to ever play basketball. And he's what, 6'10", something like that, and incredibly impressive presence. But even more impressive is his articulateness and his dignity. And he told this story of going through an airport at one point, and a woman comes up to him and says, "Oh, you're a basketball player." And he says very clearly and graciously, "No, madam, I'm a man who plays basketball." His humanity needed to come first. He was not going to be defined by the fact that he was a basketball player. And so when you define people by a category, you miss out on the opportunity to develop a relationship. And then we don't see people. I remember driving to my church office in Worcester, Mass, where I served for 14 years, an urban church. And I drive, and I remember I get stopped behind a school bus, maybe 2 blocks from the church. And I was irritated because it slowed down my commute, which wasn't that long, but it took me a little bit more time to get to church because kids had to get on the bus. And it wasn't until 2 or 3 years later I realized, oh, every kid who got on this bus was either black or brown. I didn't notice them. I didn't see them. Why? Because I got stuff to do.
Yeah, I want to read this little excerpt because it has a lot to do with what you're talking about right now. But I was thinking as you were sharing that, I had a friend of mine with me that's, gosh, he's maybe like 6. I'm 6'3", so he's taller than me. He must be like 6'5" or 6'6", and he's an African American young guy. And we were traveling together, and another kind of prominent leader saw him and said, "Wow, you must be a basketball player." And he said, "No, I'm a poet." Because he's a poet, and because he is a poet, and he's not a basketball player, But yeah, we so often kind of as Jesus says, don't have eyes to see people, and that's one of the things I mentioned, in the foreword, is that being a person of faith is not just having new ideas, but having new eyes to see people with the image of God, the sacredness of every person, and having that imagination to be open to who God's created people to be, not just to be shaped by kind of our cultural prejudices and stereotypes. So I want to read this little clip. This is from, if y'all are just joining, Seeing the Unseen, Bishop Mark Beckwith, who I'm talking with here. And this is a part where you write about your own color blindness. And you said, "I've had a lifelong impediment to seeing that is not emotional, spiritual, or cultural, but genetic. I'm colorblind. I'm among about 10% of men and less than 1% of women who have inherited a trait that makes it difficult to identify colors. Being colorblind doesn't mean that I can't see colors, but I'm rarely able to correctly identify them. I'm pretty hopeless when it comes to distinguishing between green and brown," you said. "And when it comes to naming what I call the esoteric colors, no way." So talk a little bit more about that. But you obviously are using it sort of as a metaphor to critique this idea that we just shouldn't see color. We need to be colorblind, right?
Yeah, well, I am colorblind. And so when people say, "Oh, we're a colorblind, that we don't have a racial recognition," I'm thinking, I know what colorblindness is. There's a funny story. A few years ago, the NFL decided, I'm not sure why, but they had the 2 teams out there, one in red jerseys and one in green jerseys. And a lot of men don't know that they're colorblind. I've known it since I was 6, but some are less colorblind than me. Anyway, in that game, there were more penalties than they'd ever had because so many players couldn't tell the difference between red and green. And something that helped me long time ago when I was in college and reading Plato, and he has one of his in the Republic a chapter called the Phaedo, which is Socrates asks his students, "How do you know what you know?" And they say, "Well, we know it because we know it." well, how do you know that you know it? And that was really helpful to me, because I could ask any of you who are not colorblind, how do you know that yellow is yellow? I'm just more honest than you. I don't know that it's yellow. and we often don't know. And it's sort of a cultural expectation that we're going to identify yellow as yellow. I cannot always do that. I just literally cannot do it. So it helps us. It helps me, and I think. It's always an interesting conversation starter. People start asking me, what color is this? What color is that? And I try and get them to say, we also, none of us see as well as we could.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we all have a blindness.
And that is often the response, is just that we don't, I don't see color. I just see people that bleed red blood, and yet it's also a way that a lot of people distort Martin Luther King's message. And Dr. Bernice King, who's a dear friend, has also been very vocal about this when he talks about, being known by the character of your heart rather than the color of your skin. It's not to say that we should be colorblind, but that our systems and structures see color very well. Our police biases, like so many of our implicit and explicit biases, they see color. And so we can't afford, and I think, that's the beauty of God. And you kind of point this out in the book, is that God created culture. God created us with unique fingerprints, and each of us has our own DNA, and we're unique, and God loves that diversity. God doesn't want us to be colorblind, but to see in full color, to appreciate people, and also to be able to correct the way that the hierarchy, the mythology of racial hierarchy has said that some people are more human or less human, 3/5 human, like all the ways that we've ranked people by the shade and color of their skin. So Lord have mercy. And I think I'm getting to preaching, so I better stop. But it's the difference between the monoculture of the Tower of Babel and the diversity of Pentecost, is that unity exists most powerfully in the context of diversity. So that as Red Letter Christians, we talk about harmonizing but not homogenizing. So we're not all just trying to be this kind of strange one, but we want to celebrate the diversity, and the unity of our hearts is all the more powerful. So I wanted to give you a chance to talk about this, because when we're doing organizing work, we tend to sort of gravitate toward these monoculture, no matter who we are, we're most comfortable around people who are like us, who share our same tastes and politics, and look the same, eat the same, vote the same. And yet, like, Jesus is blowing that away, kind of pushing us outside of our circles of comfort. And you talk about this, some in the book, but in organizing work, like when we're doing organizing around gun violence, some of the most powerful folks right now are hunters against gun violence, gun owners that are against assault weapons, folks that kind of busts out of the kind of silos that we exist in. So you write really powerfully about this. I don't know if you want to say more about kind of what that means for us as we're organizing, but even as we're building community, right? Like how we can get outside of that monoculture.
Let me say three things. One, briefly, St. Thomas Aquinas wrote that diversity is the perfection of the universe. So we have the full diversity. We are moving toward perfection, and we try and limit diversity because we're a little bit anxious about it, sometimes fearful of it. The other thing, we're talking about silos. My spiritual director introduced me to the concept of mandorla, Mandorla, mandorla. Shane has got it, and it's mandorla. It means almond, and it's the shape that's created when two circles intersect, and which we all learned in 6th grade arithmetic. And today, in medieval art, there are lots of depictions of mandorla, not the halo, which is over the head, but the almond shape within. And the mandorla was the intersection between heaven and earth. Today, in our world, it seems to me that the mandorla is the intersection between red and blue, conservative and progressive. And increasingly, as we all know, as our culture gets more and more polarized, the voices, the conflict entrepreneurs are saying, oh no, you need to retreat to the outer edge of your silo, because that's where you're going to be safe, and you're going to be speaking the same language, and you're going to be going to the same restaurants and talking about the same issues. Mandorla is a place, in the Christian life anyway, it's a place of transformation. It's a place of creativity. It requires risk to enter that space. And also in the book, if you can show it, Shane, maybe I can, if I pull it up, the Anastasis icon. The Anastasis icon is an icon that I pray before every day, most every day. And it is, here it is. You can't see it very well. You see the risen Christ, and he's framed in the mandorla, in the almond, and he's reaching down into hell to bring out Adam and Eve. And Jesus is positioned to bring people out of their silos. Now, the thing with the mandorla is you can't force anybody out. They have to want to come into this space of transformation. Again, it's a space of risk, but it seems to me that we in the Christian faith, well, in any faith, really, need to be inviting people into the mandorla space. That's, hunters who are advocating for stronger gun laws, that they're coming into that mandorla space. We need to offer support for that. It's a place of reconciliation. As indicated earlier, I'm an Episcopalian, and in our liturgy every week, just before we begin to move to the Eucharist, we have the exchange of the peace. Where we greet one another. And I remember when the peace was introduced in the early 1970s, people were not happy about it. People sat down, some people walked out. People said, I'm here to worship God, not to pay attention to the person to the right or the left of me. I remember my father, who was a very active Episcopalian, saying to me, he thought this was something cooked up by headquarters to thaw out what was then known as the frozen chosen Episcopalians. And I said to him, I was a religion major at the time, a little bit full of myself. No, it goes back to the 5th chapter of Matthew's gospel, when Jesus says, if you're bringing a gift to the altar, and remember you have something, your brother or sister has something against you, put your gift down and be reconciled to your brother or sister. That is an action where you're entering into the mandorla space. It's an act of reconciliation, and something that I think we, particularly in the Christian community, need to exercise more, to offer reconciliation, especially when we don't want to.
Yeah, I want to keep going on this a little bit, because I love the way that there's some things Martin Luther got right and some things he didn't get right. But I like when he talks about how every one of us has a sinner and a saint that are at war within us. And every day we're getting to choose who we're going to be. And you see that kind of in Jesus saying that, let the one who's without sin cast the first stone. All of us have that brokenness inside of us, but we also have that belovedness. We're all made in the image of God. And some people are very good at seeing the brokenness in others, but but as you think of this, there's it's kind of a tendency to just create almost like a false equivalency everywhere, that like when Trump, after the white supremacists marched in Charlottesville and killed someone, and did all the terrible acts of just overt hatred there, and said there's good people on both sides. And even now, as we look at our politics, we are very divided as a country. it's hard sometimes to have, as scripture says, to reason together, and I'm wondering, like, what are the spiritual exercises that you use to try to create healthy conversation with folks that disagree with you, that we all might kind of learn from a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think the act of reconciliation and the exchange of the peace is one way. It's a liturgical way of doing it. Another way, as you know, Shane, I've been involved in gun violence prevention for a while. And I grew up, I think, maybe when I was a Boy Scout, I shot a 22 against a target, but that was a long, long time ago. By the way, Shane and I share the same birthday. We're of different vintages, but we are the same birthday, July 11th. Anyway, I know very little about guns, so I decided I was going to go to a gun show. And I go to a gun show, and a lot of antique guns being sold, but a lot of accessories being sold. And as I'm sort of milling around, I'm listening to conversations, and they're talking in a language that I don't understand because I don't know anything about guns. And they're talking about the things that they're really, really important. And I don't understand, but what did come across to me is, these folks who are at this gun show are really passionate about this. And I also realized that guns are a fundamental part of American culture. I may not want that, I may not like that, but there it is. And the more I was there and the more I listened, and I think this is in response to your question, Shane, the more I realized my own arrogance, smugness, and self-righteousness. And that, I know what needs to be done about guns without having any relationship with people who own guns, or very little relationship, or very little understanding or desire to understand. I remember I was at some conference a bunch of years ago, and with a gun owner, and he was talking, it was a suicide conference actually, and he said he went hunting with somebody, and his hunting partner forgot or didn't want to unload his rifle as he climbed over a fence. And when they finished their hunting adventure, this guy who was reporting this to me said, "Remind me, I'm never going hunting with you again," because he was not taking the safety precautions that so many gun owners insist that they follow. Now, that said, more guns, the notion is more guns make people safe. I don't think that's the case. But to your point earlier, Shane, I'm more and more disposed to thinking that the way we can move the needle on gun violence is to engage people who are gun owners within that community, and to honor them, to listen to them, and not try and shame them. And so many people who work on the gun violence prevention end are not aware of how arrogant and shame producing they are, which just infuriates the other side.
Yeah, and you do a great job. That's the subtitle of the book is Beyond Prejudices, Paradigms, and Party Lines, and there really is a self-righteousness that is in the progressive world that is, I grew up with a conservative, legalistic kind of Christian self-righteousness, moral purity, and all of that. We don't smoke, drink, or do, or smoke, drink, or chew, or go out with girls that do, kind of thing. But then there's also this progressive justice thing that has its own kind of version of cancel culture, has its own like theological litmus test, policing, and kind of jargon language, party lines, as you say. And it's about moral superiority, and I think that that's also what Jesus called the yeast of the Pharisees. It's poisonous. It begins to really lift ourselves up by pushing other people down. And, I don't know if I've ever told you this, Mark, but when, you and I and many others were prayerfully trying to think through how to respond to the National Rifle Association gathering in Texas, so like a year and a half ago or something, like right around the same time, it was like 2 weeks after the Uvalde shooting. And we ended up having a prayer vigil there where we read the names of the Uvalde victims. And but when we went in, I don't know if I ever told you this, when we went into the NRA, to the annual conference of the National Rifle Association, I was a little nervous. And I had my credentials and name badges and everything. We had a table, but as I went in, one of the first people that I met had read some of my books, and he came up to me. He recognized me, and he said, "Listen, hey, I wanted to talk to you about your book," and like literally, it was so disarming and so wonderful. I mean, we had a great conversation, and he went on to talk to me. He was one of the exhibitors and was telling me, why he was there and things like that. And we had a great conversation, and it reminds me that we've got to be careful not to mirror that same self-righteousness that we may have experienced in a different form or with a different kind of political agenda. And most of my family are still gun owners. But most of them would be in the camp of gun owners that are concerned about gun violence, right?
Yeah.
And just today I posted a list of like 20 different common sense gun laws that still don't, do away with the Second Amendment that allow folks to own guns, but like 70-80% of gun owners want to see those changes. But it's got to be humility, right? There's got to be a posture of being willing, even though we may not agree on everything, let's find some common ground. Let's move together on some things that might save some lives.
And as you're talking about that, I'm in the book, I spent a little bit of time talking about woke, and I've been thinking about it more. Woke, to my mind, refers to a growing awareness of injustices that have been part of our history, particularly racial injustices. But people who are not woke hear it as prejudice against them for not embracing wokeness the same way that they think people who are woke do. And what's interesting to me is that a parallel, an unlikely parallel, which is also part of a common discourse, is born again. Born again refers to people who have a deeper faith in Jesus and a more robust relationship with Jesus. But people who are not born again, it seems like a prejudice against them. And what happens when woke and born again people take it to an extreme, which both sides are have a tendency to do, there is this notion that I have arrived, you have not. I'm in, you're not. I know, and you don't. And it's aggressive and it's prejudicial. I really believe it. It's prejudicial. And it just infuriates the other side. Those two terms have become weaponized now, as we know. And I think we would do well to either explain them better or not use them at all, because once something is weaponized, it's hard to, hard to unload the ammunition that's in the weapon. And
yeah, it's interesting though. It does feel like, for a lot of white folks that are using the word woke, they're trying to discredit folks that have a real genuine compassion about for other folks, that it's kind of gotten distorted and used against them. And it makes me a little nauseous sometimes to hear folks that are discrediting woke, because I kind of not you're not doing that, but I think of like that scripture that says, "Wake up, you sleeper, and Christ will shine on you." Like I think God wants to, like we need to wake up. I think of Dr. King saying like, "Don't sleep through the revolution." He talks about how we may right now be in the middle of social change that is contingent on our being, awake to the possibilities of what we can do. And so, but that, it's so interesting how people take these things and try to to discredit it. It's not a word I use very much, but I just
it's become very unfortunate. I mean, I will say I'm on one level, I would say I'm woke, but at another level, and I've been thinking about this more, I am awakening and have a desire to continue to learn, because there's so much that I don't know, because I've been taught a certain way and I've been taught to see a certain way. And I think, the ongoing awareness of, particularly of our history, which is filled with all sorts of awful, nasty, malevolent moments, and to deny them, or to whitewash them, or to not allow them, just gives them more power.
Yeah. And, this study that I cited in the book I just did on rethinking life, I talked about this study, More in Common, where it's very alarming how polarized our country is, right? So not only are folks saying that people on the other side of these issues are wrong, but they're actually saying that they're evil. And this study showed that a very disturbing number of Democrats said that Republicans are evil and the world would be better without them. And almost mirroring that were the number of Republicans that said that Democrats are evil and the world would be better without them. So you start to go, wow, I mean, this is almost half of our country saying the world would be a little better off if you weren't even here. And a lot of folks that have studied political tensions, I mean, all these are kind of indications of things that make a very combustible society, right? Like, so, as people who are seeking to be peacemakers, as Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, that doesn't mean that we go easy on truth. I mean, I think we need to speak truth now, but we also need it seasoned with love and compassion and the fruits of the Spirit, right?
Yeah, and one of the gifts of my life was having Henry Nouwen as a teacher, mentor, and friend. I was at Yale Divinity School when he was there for 10 years. And Henry Nouwen, to my mind, is the second most important Christian writer of the 20th century. The first, most important to me, is Thomas Merton. But Henry talked about the danger of thinking that people cannot be converted, which is what the Nazis did. Jews cannot be converted to anything other than the kind of the designation that the Nazis heaped on them. And when you do that, when you make the statement or have the belief that somebody can't be converted, you end up with Holocaust. And everyone has the chance to be converted to something. And so I get very nervous when I hear the term evil. Especially when I hear, and I always stand up if somebody said that person is evil. I will say that person maybe do evil things, but that person is not evil. Because if we say that somebody is evil, that makes them expendable. We need to wipe them out. And if there's anything that we can, one of the main things we need to do in the Christian faith is to stand for that. And Shane, you've been doing that for as long as you've had a voice, is to say, no. We may not like what you say. We may not agree with you, what you believe, but we're going to defend who you are as a child of God, regardless.
I mean, it's also child rearing 101 here, is, you don't tell your child you are mean. You did something mean. And, as Brian Stevenson says, we're all more than the worst thing that we've ever done. And I think we've got to constantly remind each other of that, right? That this is where grace is so powerful, that we're all more than the worst thing that we've ever done. And yet it does feel like a really critical time in our country right now, where truth is at stake, where it's not even like we're disagreeing. It's not even like we're looking at the same facts. It's like we're speaking totally different languages. We're talking at each other, and there's so much work that we've got to do. So I wanted you to talk a little bit. You write about it, the Braver Angels work, because
Yeah.
it's a really concrete example of what, some of this is kind of good in theory, but what does it really look like? And that work's so beautiful. So tell people a little bit more about it and what we can learn from it too.
Yeah. And Braver Angels, initially called Better Angels, was formed immediately after the 2016 election. 3 people said, we are headed, or we're in a train wreck, and what can we do about it? And identified themselves as Better Angels, referring to Lincoln's second inaugural address, appealing to the better angels of our nature, and brought it together a workshop in Ohio in November of 2016. 10 Trump voters and 11 Clinton voters, essentially equal numbers, not to bring one side to the other, but how can we find common ground? In the 5.5 years since, what is this, almost 7 years now, there have been thousands of conversations that have been held. It's become a national movement. We met, Braver Angels did, at a convention in Gettysburg College on the 160th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, and just before the 160th anniversary of the Gettysburg Address. And I mean, talk about having our country torn apart. I mean, we were right there honoring that. Look where we were, look what needs to happen. And we had 700 delegates there, equal number of reds and blues. And it's thought that 80-90% of people lean one way or the other. And of those 700, 200 came from another organization that wants to become part of a network. So we're trying to create a movement of depolarization, and it's grown a lot because people want to do this. And I refer to Braver Angels, now called Braver Angels, because another group already had that name. And instead of going through the courts, we decided we'd drop it. And we said, we need to be braver.
Yeah.
And we do need to be braver. I refer to Braver Angels as the secular version of the Anglican movement. The tradition that I come from was launched in the mid 1500s. Between the tension between Catholics and Protestants. We think it's bad now. It ain't nothing compared to what it was like then. Lives were lost in that tension. And the Anglicans said, if you ask an Episcopalian, Episcopalians is the same as the Anglican Communion. We just renamed ourselves when we became an independent country. If you're asked, is Episcopalian or an Anglican, are you Catholic or Protestant? We can glibly answer yes. We are neither Catholic nor Protestants, or we're both Catholic and Protestant. We live in that mandorla space in between. We were created in tension in the mid 1500s. And for the last 500 years, we have lived in that tension, sometimes better than others. As we all know, when things get tense, we want it resolved. And so what do? We take refuge in our silo with the people who say, think, sing, speak, all the rest of it similar to us, and we seal ourselves off. And we can't afford to do that. And again, the whole impetus of the book is, what are we not seeing?
Yeah.
What have we been trained not to see?
And just to remind folks, this is what we're talking about, Seeing the Unseen with Mark Beckwith. And we've got a few minutes left. If folks want to write questions, we always have some eyes on the different chats on Facebook and YouTube. And some of you are here on Zoom. We can see the chats and we're looking at them. There's a question that came up from Ken that he says, basically kind of talking about how this does take courage, right? I mean, you're talking about Braver Angels. There's a lot of folks that are talking about not just creating safe places, but brave spaces where people can listen well and speak truth together. But it's risky. And Ken says, can you talk, Mark, about initially entering that space? which can be messy, especially on hot topics like guns. How do you even kind of begin to create a healthy space and conversation with people that you probably know you already don't see eye to eye on these things?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to acknowledge that part of ourselves that doesn't want to do it at all. That part of our ego that wants to win. I've done a bunch of podcasts on guns, and when I hear the gun rights people talk the way they're doing, I'm biting my knuckle, and I know because they've told me they're biting their knuckle, and I'm not really listening. I'm fashioning a response. So I think it's important to recognize our resistance and to move beneath the ego to the soul, which is Ken has said, is a place of humility, a place of vulnerability, a place where we're afraid. But as Jesus said over and over again in the gospel, fear not, I will be with you.
Hallelujah.
But it's hard to do that. And what helps is to find people who also want to do this.
Okay.
It also helps. And there are days, I mean, I'm working in my so-called retirement on reducing gun violence and depolarizing America. These are very big rocks up steep hills, you know? So it's going to give me something to do through the rest of my life. But there are days when I say, I'm done.
Yeah.
And
okay,
I need to
I want to
acknowledge
ask you a question about this. You go ahead, finish your thought. Yeah.
Well, there's some days when I say, I'm done. I can't do this. And so I need to do something else. Because it's enormously taxing, and the movement is slow, and the resistance is high. The resistance from the other side, so-called other side, but the resistance also in me. And if I'm not restful, if I'm not prayerful, if I'm not doing the things I need to take care of my own soul in a community of faith, I'm at greater risk of becoming arrogant, smug, self-righteous, and even more difficult to be with than I already am.
Okay, now, so I'm gonna dig a little deeper on this one too. So okay, I am a big believer in Matthew 18. If your brother or sister or sibling has offended you, or you think they're doing something wrong, go talk directly with them. If they don't listen, bring a couple other folks, try to reason with them, talk with them. If that doesn't work, you kind of keep broadening the circle a little bit. But the whole goal, right, is to bring someone back into the fold, and to also make ourselves vulnerable and accountable to each other. So in the past, there has been a place for church discipline. So I've got a question, wearing your bishop's hat, or I was asking Archbishop Justin this the other day, like I think it was Bishop Ambrose, that Theodosius was the emperor and he was killing people, and he excommunicated him, didn't allow him to take the Eucharist, and said, really kind of famously, as the early Christians said, that the blood-stained hand, the one that's killed with the sword, shouldn't carry the Eucharist. Like, you can't kill people and then come take the Eucharist. And yet, there's folks that want to excommunicate Biden because of his position on abortion. But then there's times where I'm like, these, like, some of the folks that are like carrying out the worst policies in our country on immigration, the most un-Christ-like policies, like the death penalty, it's being done by Christians, right? Greg Abbott in Texas is a Catholic, responsible for about half the executions. DeSantis in Florida is a Christian as well. And so is there a place to wear the bishop's hat, or is that just a temptation to take power and to say, you're acting in a way that is not Christ-like? You've kind of removed yourself from, because I'm wondering if there's a place for church discipline, because it is our fellow Christians who are doing some of the most un-Christ-like things, and that are using some of the most un-Christ-like rhetoric in the public sphere right now.
Yeah. If you think of a bell curve, there are people at the outer edge of the bell curve who I think are so locked in to where they are that it's not a fruitful enterprise to try and engage them. That's not to dismiss them or to say they shouldn't exist or anything like that. But it's building relationships with people in that, what is it, 85% of people who are somewhere in between, to build relationships. And I'm hopeful that by building relationships in Christian communities around the issues of guns, if we can do that systematically with some kind of discipline, that's going to be a larger network of people that those who are who are refusing to reform any gun laws, they're going to have to pay attention.
Yeah, and we're always, I mean, I think I'm always we always are leaving room for people to change their mind. And I think for me, that's always important. If I think of the opinions that I had 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I would have had a really awkward conversation with myself probably, if I went back. And so we're all, as scripture says, working out our salvation with fear and trembling, but it's hard to show that grace to other people, I think, sometimes. And I was thinking of this guy I met in Texas, and he told me, he said, I'm a redneck, gun toting, pickup truck driving, gun, I'm a redneck. And he said, but I've been reading some of your books. He said, he's got me reading my Bible. And he said, I wanted to ask you to pray for me. And then he said, because I'm a recovering redneck. Mm-hmm. And I think we're all, we're all we're all work in progress. But sometimes I pray that I would have more patience, I guess, with the folks, because sometimes for me, it feels like what's also at stake is the integrity and the reputation of Christianity, because there's a lot of folks that are rejecting a version of Christianity that really doesn't sound much like Jesus at all. And it's been really distorted by the kind of Trump evangelicalism and some of the stuff that just doesn't look and smell and sound like Jesus.
Yeah, well, and it gets weaponized, and it becomes an ego adventure of win lose. I remember reading a book a bunch of years ago, written by a theologian, saying, "I win, we lose," because we put things on that binary, and we're increasingly being binary, and certainly at the political level, it's this or that, good or bad, up or down. And when it's that simplified, most of us want to be on one side or the other. And there's great pressure for us to be on one side or the other. But if we can move to a deeper level, to the place of the soul, where creativity comes from, where love is generated, it's not easy. It's not easy. And knowing that there are communities and there are people who want to do this, and my experience is that people have the desire to do this. And the founder of atomic physics was Niels Bohr, who's featured in Oppenheimer, the movie, and he's the founder of atomic physics. And Oppenheimer sort of developed what some of the initial ideas that Niels Bohr had. And Niels Bohr famously said, the opposite of a fact is a lie. 1 + 1 is never going to be 3. The fact is 1 + 1 will always equal 2. But he also said the opposite of a truth is a competing truth. Abortion is murder. Abortion is a woman's right to choose. Jesus was fully divine. Jesus was fully human. More guns make people safer. More guns make people more susceptible to violence. And we need to live into those tensions because when we live into the tension, something else can emerge. The problem is we don't stay in the tension well enough, and we don't enter into it far enough. And we don't listen long enough to people on the other side. Now, you have to exercise some discernment. Shane, I know you do. I know I do. There's some people, they're just so locked in. There's not an opening.
Yeah.
There's not an opening.
So
one of the things about
this question that came up, this is our last one, and then I'll give you the final word. I would love for you to pray us out too in just a second, Mark, but it's kind of related to that. So Corey asks, how can one say that Trump or Putin aren't evil? Was Hitler not evil? I want to hear your response. What I would say, Corey, to that is that this idea that we're all more than the worst thing that we've ever done. Henry Nouwen actually had a great line on this when he said that in those who oppress, we can see our own hands. And in those who are oppressed, we can see our own face. We see our own capacity to carry out evil. And we see our own capacity to live holy lives. And that's why we, celebrate the saints who hold the image of God. But we also have to learn from the evil of the Hitlers or the Putins or who, the folks that have done that, to say, I'm capable of that same evil. But in the end, if God's grace is not bigger than Hitler's hatred, if God's grace isn't big enough for Donald Trump, then it's not big enough for any of us. And that doesn't cheapen grace. With grace comes repentance. So I think we also need repentance. But Mark, what would you say to this, this kind of how someone can be so capable of evil and yet they still hold the image of God in them, right?
Yeah, and it's a reflexive thing in me, but it's not reactive. It's something that I've developed over the years, a conviction that no one is evil. That said, people do evil things, and some people, the three people that you mentioned, traffic in evil. They can move in and around it. They can call it out. They're very comfortable in it. My experience of evil, even though I know it exists, I've been in the presence of it, it always is disorienting. I sort of forget who I am and where I am. The notion of God and Jesus sometimes gets lost because of all this energy. Some of these people who do evil things, they're not disoriented. They're fostering it, and they need to be contained, stopped, all the rest of it. But inherently, I'd say they're not evil, because as soon as we say somebody's evil, and it's very easy to do, and we live with a level of prejudice in history in this country where we essentially said somebody was evil or less than human or whatever category we want, then they become expendable.
Yeah, so that ability to just hold that tension, that the image of God is always in us, no matter how much it feels like the devil is at work in someone, the image of God is still there. And I think it's Saul of Tarsus, who by every definition was a terrorist, a religious extremist, who went door to door trying to kill Christians. And that's why he himself will say, chief of sinners am I. And yet has this powerful conversion. So in the end, it's about how good God is, even when we're not, and that someone can have that radical of a conversion as Saul of Tarsus did, to go from a person who's terrorizing people, killing and torturing folks, to a life that now, goes on to write half the New Testament and talks so powerfully about grace. So Mark, send us out, my brother. Give us a last word. Thanks everybody for joining. If you've just been tuning in, seeing the unseens, what we've been talking about with Bishop Mark Beckwith. And next month, our book will be American Idolatry. Thanks for joining for Book Club. Mark's going to send us out with a closing word and prayer. Thank you, my brother, for a holy hour of conversation.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, Shane, for this opportunity and to dig deep as you and I do, and the commitment that we share, and the faith that guides us. Before I issue a prayer, I remember in Isaiah, the wolf will lie down with the lamb, and I remember Woody Allen, who's not necessarily a person of faith. Yeah, the wolf may lie down with the lamb, but the lamb is not going to get much sleep. And so we have to be wary. We have to be aware, but not fearful. And so let us pray. Gracious God, thank you for the opportunity to gather together across cross the airwaves to be in your presence, to listen and learn of your spirit, of your life, and help us to continue to grow, to develop an awareness of your presence in each and every one of us, so that we can be open, that we can risk entering into that mandorla space where transformation, reformation, epiphany can happen. And may we take on the mantle of reconciliation, because you've given it to us through your Son. And may we be empowered and emboldened to witness to that grace and truth. And now, as we go to the places from this time where you would have us go, may we be reminded that we never leave you, because you always go with us, leading us, guiding us, and setting us free. And for that, we're grateful. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you, brother. Thanks everybody for tuning
Thank
in.
you.
We'll see
Thank you,
soon.
Shane.
Join
God
us for
bless.
morning prayer. Join us for morning prayer on September 1st. See you, Mark. I hope to see you soon, buddy. Take care.
Okay.